everyone, and welcome to Vision Chats, where the only thing that matters in the next hour is the future. I hope everyone is doing great. We have over 1,000 of you who have registered for today's Vision Chat. We're really excited. Listen, I started this Vision Chat series several months ago because I am obsessed with the future. Constantly thinking about it. My guest today is laughing at me as I say this because she knows how I am. Um, and I just was eager to invite other people who are obsessed with the future, who are visionaries in their own right, to just talk about important topics in our world of work that impact people. The format for these vision chats has been really simple from the beginning. I just want to have a natural conversation with people, kind of like I'm at a coffee shop, unscripted. I never sent questions ahead of time to my guests. We agree on the topic, and sometimes I have guests who ask me to send them questions ahead of time, and I respond. We don't do that on vision chats, so we just have a very natural conversation that will feel very natural to you. The feeling that I want you to have is kind of like my guests and I are just in a coffee shop having coffee, talking about important topics, and you're just listening in, and hopefully you can chime in and join the conversation. So that is the format. And today I have the mother of all futurists with me today, Cruzvergara. Christine, you and I have known each other for a long time. I think since our early days in our career. We won't mention the year. I was at the University of Florida. I think you were at Georgetown at the time. You moved on to take on more responsibilities at George Mason. I did the same around the same time at Carnegie Mellon University. And then I moved on to Stanford, also to take on more responsibilities. You did the same at Wellesley. And just around the time when I transitioned to Johns Hopkins University, you moved on to Handshake. So our careers were kind of like, parallel a little bit, but throughout all of it, I think there were some common things here between us is that first, we were both probably equally obsessed about the future and future trends and how we can make changes in our profession and in higher education. And then two, we just really became very close friends. So I've appreciated our friendship, and we've written a few pieces together. We've presented. So it's been fun, and I'm excited to spend the next hour with you today to talk about what is happening in higher education and in career services and the world of work. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me back. It's fun to be here.
That's great to have you. Listen, so you and I wrote this article a year ago, putting all sorts of directions and all sorts of recommendations and projections about the future. And we really thought like we had something there. We're like, oh, just, like these things are going to happen in the next 10 years and the 20 years. Little did we know that 6 months later, our whole world will just flip upside down. And here we are now with an opportunity to just reflect about what we wrote and to put some of our thinking and to test it out a little bit, pressure test it and see how on we are and what we need to correct. So maybe we start there. Let's talk a little bit about what we wrote about in the foundational pieces of our article and where we are today and how they fit.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, just what you were saying. We wrote this piece. We knew that these trends, these predictions that we were making would have some validity, some foundation, some credibility as we were moving into the 2020s. I don't think any of us could have ever predicted just how accelerated all of that would happen, though, right? I mean, we wrote this in November, we published it in November, and literally 2 months later, COVID hits the world and everything is sort of forever transformed. And I think the biggest thing here is the fact that we were already watching this trend. We were already seeing this movement even before COVID happened. What the pandemic did was simply accelerate what might have taken, as you were saying, 2 to 3, 5 years to happen, and it condensed it down into 1 year. It condensed it down into a shortened amount of time that now we have to be able to accelerate the way we think, we have to be able to adapt the way we behave, and we have to be open to the changes that I think normally just simply take groups and sectors and industries a little bit more time to sort of come around to it. And I think the racial awakening as well, and the examples of injustice that are in our country have also been brought to the forefront in such a visceral way. They've always existed, they've always been there, but I think they're now more mainstream because people are paying attention and they're seeing it. And I think folks are really wrestling with, what do we do with that? And how do we actually change it? And what is our role? Because we can't just be silent about it. You can't pretend like it's not there anymore. And I think that is probably one of the most core pieces to everything that we wrote about. This whole era we talked about is social mobility, and we talked about access and equity and what that means. And everything in our 5 directions is about structure, and it's ultimately about systems. And so I think that it's so core to everything that we are doing as we move into this essentially new digital and virtual sort of era. What came up for you?
Well, I mean, I think the foundational piece of what we were writing about is that our ultimate vision and our ultimate raison d'être, the purpose, needs to transform to equity. It can't be just about providing services or for placement outcomes or for satisfaction data from our students. It really needs to be about bridging the gap between the haves and the have-nots. That was a foundational piece of what we wrote, which meant that you're not going to do this or accomplish this by just coming up with some diversity programs or equity and inclusion programs or just hiring more diverse staff, or, I mean, we see all of these interventions. It really needs to come down to the core of your organization, say, what is our purpose? And our purpose needs to transform to that, which means that then if you really want to hold yourself accountable to that, you have to start addressing the structures and the systems of your entire organization and of the university. And that means everything from where your organization reports to what it is accountable to for what are the outcomes that it needs to publish, to what are the numbers that show success. So I think one of the things that we wrote about in the article is that anything less than 100% is unacceptable. It's not equitable. So now it's a different kind of it's a different goal. It's no longer 30% is acceptable of engagement, or 40% or 50%, or we get 90% placement. That's not what it's about. Is, do you engage 100% of your students, and then are the outcomes equitable at the end of the day? So when I compare your Black and brown students with your more privileged students, do I see similar outcomes, or do I see gaps in salaries and satisfaction and fulfillment with their outcomes? So that changes the whole conversation about career services and why it needs to change. One of the other things also that you and I talked about, Christine, is that in our previous article in 2014, we had made the projection that these types of cycles tend to change every 20 years. And apparently in recent decades, it's clear to us that it needs to be looked at every 10 years, not every 20 years, that these paradigms shift every 10 years. And we put that in the article, and then 2 months later, COVID hit, and it's showing us now that it's probably going to happen even shorter than that. Like the predictions and the directions we were recommending for the next 10 years are happening right in front of our eyes now, just 6 months later, at a much faster pace, which tells me that we're probably due for another article probably in a couple of years, not until 2025 or 2030, which is a scary thought. So we made a bunch of recommendations and directions for where do we go. And let me set this up here for everybody and say that Christine and I, when we wrote about this, we did a lot of back and forth. And there were quite a few arguments and disagreements and how far do we want to go. But the one common thing between us is that we really were committed to make bold recommendations, not just soft ones. We really wanted at this time not to just say this is where things are going, but to say this is what you should do, what we should do as a profession in order to make an impact. So we wanted to push ourselves and our colleagues. And as a result, I think we got a lot of different reactions. I mean, we got a lot of praise, but we also got quite a bit of pushback from colleagues around the country because we were really challenging the status quo. So let's talk about these five and maybe touch on some of the controversial things that seemed controversial then, but maybe not anymore in the age of COVID.
And that sounds awesome. You know, I think the other really core theme before we get into our 5 directions is your career and mine has been marked by change management. That's essentially what we do. And that's what we've done at every single role, institution, company that we've worked for. And I think now more than ever, it reinforces and affirms for me how important it is that our field and our profession get on board and get comfortable with change and change management, because it is happening more quickly, it is happening more rapidly. And just as you are advising and helping your students and helping them figure out how to be more adaptable and more agile, we should be shining that mirror right back on ourselves and making sure that we are equally as comfortable being adaptable and agile, because that's going to be the only way that we can move forward with what is needed so that we can serve our students better. So anyway, I just felt like that was one of the themes just in hearing what you said and reflecting on kind of the core of our article. I think that's really, really key.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with you on that. So I'm peeking into people's comments, and I want to encourage you to keep putting your comments in there. We'll try to touch on as many of them as we can. I see that somebody has raised their hand. If you have a question, feel free to put it in there. We'll try to address it. Jeffrey Moss wants to borrow our crystal ball, he says. So we'll ship it to you, Jeffrey. So we'll be happy to do that. And I appreciate the endorsement of our comment that came from both of us, that we can't just slap the word virtual on what we used to do before and say we have reinvented. That's probably, I mean, as we start talking about the 5 directions that we have implemented now in the age of COVID, what is really easy to do, I mean, and I understand that it was challenging at the beginning, but now a few months into it, it is really easy to do. And forgive me for saying this, everybody, but it is easy to just add virtual to counseling, virtual to career fairs, virtual to workshops. And if that's all you're doing, you have not really leveraged this opportunity to truly transform your organization for the sake of your students. We have the responsibility to really take this opportunity, which is really a challenging opportunity, but it is an opportunity to rethink our entire models to accomplish the original goals. So let's talk about each one of those. So the first one was systematically integrating into academics. We put that in the article. We clearly had an angle there that, like, this is how career services has worked all these years. It is not working. This is pre-COVID. We were saying this. It's even more so now. It is not working. We have got to just call a spade and do the right thing in order to move into a more integrated system. So as you look at that section, what comes up in your mind as what needs to even to happen even more so now today in the age of COVID?
Well, I think for me, when you look at what happened with COVID and students being sent home, some schools still being some form of hybrid, right? The one core component that hasn't gone away for our students is academics, right? Like the academic component of their experience is the only thing that they all have to do right now in order to be able to move forward. So I think it only emphasizes how important our whole message about integration has to be. However, I would say that looking back at our article, I feel a little bit differently about the reporting line. I don't know that I feel as strongly anymore about where the reporting line has to be, as long as the integration is happening. And I think the integration, because the institutions that are obviously even represented on this call today are so different, I think that can look a lot of different ways. And you have to figure out sort of for the culture of your institution what that might represent. But I also think there are other ways that you can embed into the academic system without it necessarily being a course, right? So for example, I'll give you a few thoughts. So one is University of Miami, Christian Shop has decided to use students in a really thoughtful way to essentially eliminate nearly all advising from their personal full-time staff so that all of his full-time team can focus on integration into the academics. This is also something that University of Liverpool in the UK is doing, right? So he's reallocating his team's time to think about that integration and those relationships rather than focusing on the one-to-one, which can actually be more scalable if you use students. And I think that's one example of how you can integrate. I think another way you can integrate is, and we'll talk about this a little bit further because I know we talk about scalable structures and technology, but we're actually in early conversations with a few institutions about how do you actually embed, for example, handshake activation and profile completion into course enrollment, into that process, into orientation in a way that ensures all new students and transfer students have access to some of their resources that can at least jumpstart. Because the reality when we talk about access and equity on 100% engagement is not all 100% of your students need the same engagement. There are lots of students that just need to be pointed in the right direction, shared the resources, and they're going to be just fine. And you need to be able to do that so that you can then sift and figure out who are the students that need more assistance, and you can reallocate your time accordingly to do that. So those are some of the things that immediately come to mind for me. But I'm curious for you, when you're at Hopkins now going on 3 years, I believe, and you and your team have had a chance to really fully integrate and shake things up in some new ways. Do you still agree with what we wrote, or do you think a little bit differently about the push towards academic or the reporting line or things like that?
I do still agree with just about everything that we wrote pre-pandemic, and I think some of the themes that we wrote about are proving themselves to be right even more so now. So let me just go through each one of those. Let me just put away the issue of reporting line so that I can talk about the more important issues. I still feel very strongly, so this is an area that you and I disagree a little bit, is that I still feel very strongly that career services has no place in student affairs.
I agree with that one. I actually do agree with that point.
You do, but you're saying that you don't feel less strongly about it anymore.
I don't feel as strongly that it has to report to academics, but I do think student affairs is the wrong division for career services. For the sheer majority, for 99%, I do agree that student affairs is not the right division.
Yeah, I mean, and let me just take or claim the other 1% and say for 100% of institutions in higher education, get career services out of student affairs. I started up my work in student affairs. I think you might have too. I have deep appreciation for the work. Our colleagues in student affairs do tremendous work in community development and crisis management and identity development. There's just so much that is happening that is powerful in residence halls and in student leadership centers, etc. At the same time, I think career services just plays in a different world where it intersects with alumni in a different way, with employers, with donors, and there are accountability measures that are far beyond what happens in the student experience. So in a way, the way I look at it is that you have your enrollment management and the accountability numbers there for the institution. And then you have your outcomes, your graduation outcomes that then lead to alumni engagement and donor outcomes. And you have student experience in the middle, and student experience, leave that for the most part to student affairs. I also think that unfortunately over the last decade or two, student affairs has veered more and more towards crisis management and its own brand and its own work. Despite that, all of our colleagues are really committed to the co-curricular learning. So I get all of that. But if you really want to give career services a lot of room to not only breathe, but also to invent and reinvent and transform and do all of this transformational work, you got to take it out of there. So that's my recommendation for any senior leader in higher education who is looking at their structures, that student affairs is the wrong place for it. Where should it go? I mean, I still think academic affairs is the right place, because ultimately what we are trying to do is to create obvious pathways for engagement in career and life design for students. They need to be obvious, meaning that curriculum or co-curricular experience can't be hidden from students, because when it is hidden, then you end up with the culture of haves and have-nots, because the haves will find it. They have learned from a young age how to navigate these structures to find those opportunities to engage with the internship, or to meet with a counselor, or to attend a workshop, or to engage with that content. And then the have-nots are your first generation, your limited income, people who are still trying to figure out how to navigate this complex institution. And now online, even more so. So it's even more complicated because it's all via Zoom and etc. And if it's just left up to them, they're going to miss out on it. And the only way to create those obvious pathways, or I shouldn't say the only way, but a very systematic change that we can make, is that we integrate it into the academics. They know how to register for classes, and they know how they can figure out with their academic advisors how to create a pathway towards graduation. We need to just integrate career engagement and in that pathway somehow. So it really needs to be from your admissions letter that says, congratulations, you're admitted at Johns Hopkins University. And here's your advisor, or here's how you connect with your advisor. Here's how you start charting the path towards graduation. But we need to include in there, this is how you start charting the pathway towards success after graduation. And here are the things that you ought to be doing, whether it's connecting with a mentor via your university mentoring structures, or getting an internship, or when you should engage with your career services staff. These are things that need to start from there and then integrated into the academic experience from that. I still feel very strongly about that, as opposed to, for example, aligning career services with alumni engagement, or with alumni relations, or with development. There are arguments for those, but ultimately, the most important thing is that not a single student misses out on these key transformative experiences and connections with mentors and with employers. And the way to ensure that is that we integrate it into the academic experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think
no, I don't disagree with you. I think there's just more nuance to it, and I think there are three elements when someone is talking. Let's actually break down integration, because I think people understand integration differently, right? So if you want something to be truly integrated, reporting line is one element. The second element is the processes and structures that have to be created so that you don't undermine the reporting line. And then the third is the people element, and making sure that you actually have the right people in the right seats that have the right mindset and the leadership skill and capacity to be able to then move this forward, right? And I think often the reason that integration or just a reporting line to academics doesn't work is because you're missing those other two elements. And you have to be able to actually do those components. And I think it does require getting creative, right? Like, when I was at Wellesley, academics was obviously such a core piece to the experience that I knew there was nothing we were going to be able to do to be successful if we were not somehow integrated into academics. So, I mean, you know this, you actually helped me as I was thinking about the position, I was negotiating my role, but I knew that I needed to be able to be an academic council. I had to negotiate for myself a role where I was going to have voting rights in academic council so that I could bring legislation to council and create a structure. I wanted to create a committee. Now, those of us that have been in higher ed, you can create a committee every day of your life, and you can create a million committees. But I wanted to create a committee that was formally part of academic council because I wanted to have a carrot for the faculty that I wanted to engage. I wanted it to count towards their tenure and promotion, and to be able to have that embedded, right? So that's one way of thinking about what are the existing systems that are at your institution, and how do you creatively get within them and start to make them work to your favor. But I think you have to have those three elements. You have to have the right people in the right seats, the right leader, you have to have the right systems and processes, and you have to have the right reporting line. And those three have to come together in order for real integration to happen. And the reality is it is hard, and it does take some time to be able to maneuver and navigate those relationships for that to happen.
So I agree with you. And one of the comments here from one of our attendees is how do we integrate faculty, or how do we bring faculty and academics? I think actually the comment says, how do we convince them? to do this. And that's, I think, I mean, I react to that question differently because I feel like the goal has changed from needing to convince anybody or persuade them to be a partner to actually just integrate to a point that it's just the natural thing for them to do. Look, reporting lines can help you do that. Elevation of status of career services and prominence in the university organization can do that. But I think I think creating a lot of interesting, valuable content that is helpful to academics can get you there too.
Mhm.
This, I think, will lead us to the next piece of the conversation is about what is the right structure of career services. The worst part of career services structure is the word services. So the fact that we and I think our dear friend Andy Chan said it best in his really initial piece back in the day. Career services must die. He didn't mean our offices must die. He meant the word services must die. Like the fact that, and I think a lot of people didn't get it at the time, but and I'm sure they do now. It's really the idea that we are a student services organization for the most part in our models, and we shouldn't be. If we transition into content organizations instead of student services, believe me, that content will become much more valuable to the faculty and to your academic partners around the university. Here's why. So follow me here with the difference between the two. Career services, meaning student services, meaning what you're trying to do is promote your counseling services to students, your mock interview services to students, resume critiques, your career fairs, your workshops, etc. And partnership with faculty, for the most part, means to them, even if you don't intend it that way, means to them, I just need to tell my students about you so that they can come and consume these services. If I think about it, and if I value these services and I think that they are indeed helpful, and all it takes is one student in my class to tell me that they came to one of these services and had a terrible experience or did not go, it was not helpful, for me to just completely write you off. This is what career services or student services model does to us, and it pigeonholes us into this area that always puts us in a position of having to reassure partners, convince them, persuade them, try to sell ourselves to them, and that is not a partnership. That doesn't work. Now imagine if you become a content organization, and you don't become a content organization without shedding services. That means that a lot of these services, it's not like you have to just do both. You have to let go of them. And if you completely let go of them and create a new brand of becoming a content organization, meaning that what I tell my organization at Johns Hopkins is, we need to think like a BuzzFeed. We need to think like a lot of these powerful magazines that are just refreshing content on a daily basis and producing a lot of knowledge, because that's how today's generation of students consume this information. They process it really quickly and then take advice and guidance from it and then make decisions based on that. They're not going to try to like the clinical model no longer works for the majority of our students. Some, they will need it, but for the majority, it doesn't work for them to come and schedule an appointment and wait in a waiting room and come and meet with you. That is a long process, and they could avoid it by just logging into your website or your social media content and get what they need really quickly. If you get really good at being a content organization, your faculty, your academic partners will find a lot more value with you, because then they can start to infuse that content into their syllabi, into their courses, possibly bringing you in to share that content. They would love to have you as a speaker, because now you're a thought leader, you are a content generator, you know what you're talking about, you're an expert, you're not a service provider. Two completely different things. What do you think?
Yeah, I actually love the piece about the content management. I think that is so key. And one of the things I've really been reflecting on, especially now that we are virtual, is the fact that we should be thinking about sort of mass education. instead of, one of the things we talked about, I think in this section of our article, was the removal of sort of one-on-ones from its most one-on-one advising in its most traditional form, and instead focusing on more scalable structures that will actually allow us to reach more students, so that your few one-on-one appointments that you need to do are actually more meaningful, because they're for the students who need it the most, right? The ones that will fall through the cracks. And I think what I've been thinking about is, we've actually all been educated virtually for a long time. We just haven't thought about it that way, right? If you think back to your childhood, how many of us watched Sesame Street? How many of us watched Mr. Rogers? How many of us grew up on Bill Nye the Science Guy, right? That's technically virtual education. It's virtual education. They've been educating masses, millions of students and of children for years. And so how do we think about ourselves, and how do we think about our work in a way where we are generating content, as you said, and we are taking lessons from media? I think one of the things that has always been true for me, I think this is true for you, is we've always gotten inspiration from other industries. Mm-hmm. We don't just look at our own industry to try and create and recreate or see what's new. We look beyond us, and we look at what else is in the world that we might be able to take from and to adapt and to figure out. And so I'm not saying that we all need to become, TV personalities, but I am saying there are lots of good principles and lessons from the media industry, which on a daily basis is educating mass numbers of people to figure out what can we do differently about how we ensure that some of this career education is actually getting to 100% of our students. And again, it's getting to them in different ways and forms and mediums and to different depths, but we have to start somewhere in terms of that mass, focusing on reach and scale first, and then you can focus on sort of the one-on-one after. But that's sort of what comes out for me when I hear you talk about the content moderation piece.
And content is scalable. That's the cool part about it, is that we're trying to reach 100%. You can never reach 100% with the services model. And that is, I think, one point that we put out in the article that I know challenged a number of people in our profession. And that's what we were trying to do, is really just get us to really think about these concepts. Is that, I mean, I say this sometimes in my talks around the country, is I pose this question: give me a budget number that will allow you to reach 100% with the exact services structure that you have today. Just give it to me. What is it? And people really stop, because, like, I mean, what is it? Double the budget you have? Triple? Do you want to quadruple the staff that you have? Then you will be able to serve every single student the way you're serving them. You can provide a one-on-one counseling session to every single one of your students. You can really reach that 100%. And the truth is that there isn't. I mean, it's not possible to have universities spend that much money to do that. But content is scalable. You can create a lot of content and put it out in very clever ways, and market it and integrate it into the academic experience. Create courses that also generate content. Turn your team into thought leaders and into scholars that generate this powerful content for your students and for your alumni, and you put it out there. And now with COVID-19, I think what is happening is that we're all becoming slowly more and more comfortable with content generation. We're doing more Zoom calls and chats like this one, and webinars, and that's what I mean by content. You're creating something that you can record, and you no longer have the pressure to have to think of how many people are going to show up to that room, because the investment was really low, and then you're going to record it, put it on your website. Then it's a matter of marketing it that way. I saw a comment from our dear friend Norma. Hi, Norma. Who well, I think said something right there, is that good content is requires the foundational piece of practice, that you have to be a really good, strong practitioner in order to really generate content. I think the two go hand in hand. I don't think that you need good practice to generate content only. I mean, I think you need content also to be a good practitioner. So it is sort of like a yin and yang, where they go together. But what I will tell you is that, I'll just share this from my own anecdotal experience, is that the people who have had the hardest time with this content generation assignment, let's call it, if you will, transformation, are the people who are deeply rooted into their practice, who are just really good practitioners, and then that's what they value, that's what they're really good at, and challenging them to dedicate time and put all of the gifts that they have in their practice into writing and into video production and all of that. They really struggle with that. That doesn't mean that it's all of them, but I find that, for example, when we started hiring at Johns Hopkins, when we were transforming our organization, I had actually put it really clear in the job description that candidates who really love the one-on-one counseling and are really into that work and are strong practitioners, that they probably shouldn't apply for this job, because we're really looking for content generators. And what we went for instead are people who are really comfortable with social media, who are really comfortable, who have done a lot of writing and blogging before, and who have worked for magazines and are marketers. And we hired those people instead. And we taught them the life design concepts and the career development, but they came in not only with a skill of content generating, but also with a passion for it. And it's changing our organization in a heartbeat. That is a different way of thinking. I understand that this lands differently for our colleagues, because we have a lot of people who have worked all their lives building a career as career counselors and getting master's degrees. And, I was one of them. I'm a trained counselor and started my career that way. But I had to really transition into being a content generator, because I knew that this is the new world that we live in. So this is, I think, the paradigm shift that we're going through now. And the people who will make it are the people who will accept that this is where it's headed and transform, or the people who come from the outside and then find their new paths into in this new field that we have. And I think the people who will struggle are the ones who will stay really, who will put down their feet and just say, no, it is really about the practice of career counseling and career coaching, and not transition. But I think you can do both. I think if you can find a way to be an awesome content generator all the time for your students, for your institution, and then use that to feed into your practice, you can become a powerful career services practitioner.
I think one of the things that you mentioned makes me think a lot about systems. So in this section, we're talking about scalable structures, and you just talked about the discomfort in the feeling that some folks might have in essentially changing their professional identity, right? Like you're asking them to change or shift, adapt their professional identity, or you're looking for others that have a different professional identity. And I think what's really struck me, especially in my own transition from higher education to ed tech, and in particular Handshake, is I've realized how deeply uncomfortable it feels when we're presented with a new system, or we're presented with a new structure. And I don't mean system literally in terms of platform. I mean system in terms of a new way of doing things, right? And so let's actually you were actually an early Handshake partner, Farouk. You were at Stanford at the time. I think you joined literally part of the first 65 schools. This was what? Oh, you're like the number 3? Yeah, you were super, super early. And people thought you were crazy. I mean, let's just be honest here. People thought you were straight up crazy for going to Handshake at the time. And 6 years ago, one of the things that was most crazy about that transition was the fact that Handshake introduced a network, right? And so as a network, your employers were going to have access to other schools. And I remember this so vividly. You used to tell us the pushback that you would get from our own peers in our own profession about, well, Farouk, why would you do that? You're going to lose control. You're going to lose your relationships. Why would you share that? That's important to you, right? And now 6 years later, this is normal. We're used to it. This is what we do. We have over 1,100 universities and colleges as partners, and it's growing by hundreds every year. And it's now the norm, but it felt really uncomfortable and really hard initially. And I remember what you used to say, this was again, before it was popular. You were like, but it's going to give students more access. And if I'm able to help students at another school have access, isn't that ultimately why we're educators, right? Because we want to be able to do that. And I think for me, it was again further emphasized last year when we did Handshake Open, the type of concern and worry that I think comes with the discomfort of change is real. And I think it's normal, but I also think that as human beings and as people who are so deeply committed, I do believe that our field is so deeply committed to student access and equity. We also have to remember that it's not a zero-sum game. And for us to truly create systems that are going to be able to be accessible and equitable for all of our students is going to require us to have to face and look at new ways of doing things and new systems that might be fundamentally different from what we have been taught as professionals and in this field. And I have no doubt that as we continue to push the boundaries of what that looks like and to continue creating and redefining new systems, it's going to be hard and it's going to feel uncomfortable. But I feel like that's exactly what this whole conversation has been about this year, as we've thought about racial injustice and as we've thought about how do we truly serve all students, especially our underrepresented ones. So anyway, I appreciate you bringing up the piece about discomfort, because I think I actually see that on a lot of different levels.
Right, and I think you and I got some pushback in our article, because we had put in that one-on-one services need to become ancillary in college career services, meaning that they are no longer your core of what you offer, but they're just on the side, and you should focus all of your energy and your investments and your budget on the things that truly scale, and then you allow that to be offered to the people who absolutely need it. What that really fundamentally means is that you no longer go to courses and put out flyers, etc., encouraging people to come to your counseling services or to your one-on-one services. It's no longer the message. The message was wrong from the beginning. What we're saying to students, come and see us. We no longer should say that. What we should be in the business of is putting a lot of content, creating a lot of connections, and just become an institutional leader of this initiative that gets 100% of students engaged in the things that really matter to them, which are the immersive experiences, mentoring, the connections with people. And we got some pushback. And, for the record, I'll say this to everybody here, is that Christine and I went back and forth on this very point. And I will tell you that we settled on Ancillary because that was you won that battle, Christine, because for me, what I really wanted to write, and I still believe it, is that they should go. One-on-one services should no longer be part of our offerings. Of course, when that doesn't mean that you are forbidden from seeing a student one-on-one. In fact, I think if you completely remove it from your palette of what your offerings, you're going to end up having a lot more of them, but they happen organically. I always took felt like taking that bet was worth it, and we've gone that direction at Johns Hopkins, and we're seeing the fruits of it. We're now engaging 400% more students than we did this time last year, and virtual is certainly helping with that. Many of you are experiencing similar bumps, but for us, we just took it out of the equation. We just said, like, it's not even an offering that we have, but our staff are still meeting with students all the time one-on-one, but it's happening organically because they're engaging in many other ways that bring those conversations back to them. So I felt that way. I really felt like I wanted to put that in the article, eliminate one-on-one services. And Christine, you held me back, and you said, look, no, I don't agree with that. So we went for that, and I think some people are going to applaud you for it. So you're going to pick up some brownie points from the audience now, and I'm going to pick up some more haters as a result of it. But I think
it's about framing, right? Like what you just described that your team's doing. Like you said, they are actually still meeting with students, but they are doing it in an ancillary way, right? And I think, and I guess I think about it from a perspective of working in technology. Technology can scale. We can help provide a lot of content. We can help aggregate content. We can actually, I'm reading some of the comments on the side. We can actually, in many respects, I'm thinking about some of our work, and we can actually help take some of the amazing expertise that has been created at some institutions and find ways to actually scale and share that out across multiple institutions so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? Technology is great at doing that. Technology can't personalize some of the things that I know and I do still believe are 100% needed in one-on-one interactions, and especially for some of our underrepresented students. But I do agree that it can be ancillary so that you can actually create other systems to be able to actually reach more students in mass and to focus the one-on-ones that you do in a more meaningful way, which is, I think, what your team has actually done. So I think it also comes down to the framing and the thinking of how we talk about that.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think what I really wanted to do is I mean, the framing is correct, but I also wanted to frame it. I also wanted to just make it completely not ambiguous. Like I wanted it to be really clear that we no longer value this amount of work being the core of what we offer. So, and one way to just take away that ambiguity is to just say, we got rid of it. We don't do it anymore. But I know that it happens. But if I just say it, then it's really clear to our teams, to our stakeholders on campus, that we're putting our entire value on the connections, on the immersive experiences, on mentoring, on content, on becoming a really prominent organization that is integrated throughout the entire university to ensure that not a single student is missed. Because I know when a student is missed, very likely they are a first gen, they're a limited income, they're a student of color. Most likely it's one of these three if they are missed. So how do I ensure that I have equity? I gotta make sure that I have systems and structures that not a single one of my students are missed. And so far we're headed that direction. One of the questions that I see here is, how do we measure all of this? Well, I no longer, so first of all, I know that a center is a student services organization when the first assessments or metrics that they offer our number of appointments and satisfaction with those appointments, a number of people who attend career fairs, etc. I know that you have so fully transitioned into a more content model, connections model, and a model that is based on equity. If you're measuring outcomes rather than input, which is our fourth direction, is focusing on output rather than input, and you're comparing you're comparing between the haves and the have-nots. What are the outcomes of your Black and brown students versus your white students? What are the outcomes of your first generation versus your non-first generation? Your limited income versus non-limited income? What are the differences in the salaries they make and what they in the internships that they have? How long does it take them to get a job? And truly, we have done that assessment at Johns Hopkins. And the numbers were alarming to me. I mean, that's what made us really shift, and I think finally our entire team got it. When we presented those numbers, we said, this is what we're working for. It's about equity. It's not about services and satisfaction of students who show up. It's about who doesn't show up and why they don't show up, and how do we ensure that we create systems where no one is missed. So let's transition to metrics. I know I'm skipping a step here. We come back to life design, but let's talk about metrics and what was really important for you as you were thinking about that when we were writing about it.
Well, when we were writing about it, I was so fresh in my job at Handshake, and I think one of the things that really struck me was the difference in how metrics and accountability are used in industry and versus higher education. Things are just tighter. We have very clear goals, we have very clear metrics, we have very clear numbers, and we have very clear systems to be able to track how we are progressing. And we, for those that are on the call that are big data nerds and love numbers, this will be familiar to you, but the notion of having lagging indicators versus leading indicators was something that really got drilled home for me last year while we were writing this article. So outcomes, for example, would be a lagging indicator. Once that's already happened for a student, right, you're not necessarily going to shift or change that outcome. So it's a good measure. It's certainly a valuable metric, and it is something that, quite frankly, all of your senior administrators understand. And I think that's also the other important piece that I'll get to right after this. So that's a great lagging indicator. But then when you move up funnel, you essentially have to ask yourself, what are the leading indicators that would help you to believe that you're actually progressing and moving in the right direction? And application, and I know this question actually popped up somewhere in the chat, I think is a really interesting one, because it is literally, to apply for a job is literally the one action that every single student has to take. They can make connections, they can build relationships, they can go to a one-on-one, they could go to a group appointment, they can go to an event. All of those things are fantastic, but ultimately they have to take one action to actually get the job, and that is to apply. And so if you start tracking that and you start tracking it across all of the demographics that you just talked about, what does my applicant rate look like for my white students, for my Black students, for my Latinx students, right? Across the different schools or colleges that I have, what does that look like? Where do we see gaps? Then you know as a team how to better focus your time and your intervention so that you're actually going to have the greatest impact on what you are doing. And I think that's a really interesting piece too as we look at virtual. So I'll actually combine a few of the themes that we've been talking about today, which is redefining the narrative, right? And talking about things differently, and also outcomes. So for example, I know that one of the things that you feel really strongly about is career fairs. You hate career fairs. You're not a fan of them. And one of the things that the edicts that you had given your team was create something that is not a virtual career fair, right? That was one of the things that I know you told your team to do, and they created something really fantastic, right? Yeah. What's really fascinating to me, and I know we actually have a lot of handshake schools on here, but I'll be really honest. I actually, when we first decided to create virtual fairs, I wanted to call it something different. Because in my mind, what we were doing was not just creating virtual fairs in the way that I think a lot of people think about it, right? And just to your point, slapping virtual in front of whatever it is that we were doing before. I wanted us to redefine the experience and to really get at the core of what the purpose was. And I wanted to rename it. I actually wanted to think of it as different because I knew that the experience we were creating was going to be different than just going to a fair. However, I have a very smart colleague that reminded me we are going to market in a very short amount of time. And if you redefine this category into something that others are not yet ready for, because to everybody else's point today, change is hard and it can be intimidating for folks. And when people are stressed, they're not also thinking about all the ways that they can change. She was like, you kind of have to call it something that people recognize. And you can redefine what that experience is. We are going to redefine what that experience is, but you're going to have to call it something that people recognize so that they see it as filling a need and a gap that they have. And so with our virtual fair tool, and as you and I have actually talked about, it's not actually virtual fairs in the way that people used to think about it. It's actually virtual connections. What we essentially created was a modern version of how meaningful connections can still happen virtually. But if what you're looking for is a physical fair experience, you're going to be disappointed because that's not what we were building for. We were building for a new type of experience that got at the core purpose of why you wanted to create such an event in the first place. And so the other piece that I think is really fascinating is we've gotten a lot of questions about whether or not some of these virtual things are going to stay. And I actually think they will. We're hearing it from employers and we're hearing it from students. They like it. And we're actually hearing from a lot of career centers, we have more data and outcome metrics now than we ever did before. So think about it. I'll just use career fairs as an example. Previously, you would be able to tell me how many employers registered for your fair and how many students showed up to your fair. And you'd probably be able to give me a satisfaction metric of what people thought of their experience there. But now we are actually able, and we have over 2,200 fairs, I think, that we've hosted. We're already over the 50% mark. And we've been able to give back to our schools, not only how many people registered and came, we can tell you how many connections were actually made between how many students and employers. And soon we're going to be able to also tell you the follow-up actions that were taken after your fair. How many students logged back in to look for more jobs? How many students logged back in to connect with other peers? How many logged back in to answer messages from employers? And how many ultimately applied, right? Those are impact stats that now as an institution, you're going to be able to tell a much better story than you were ever able to tell when you were in the physical space. So I think those are examples of how we can start to shift towards outcomes and impact versus just input in that. So anyway, I got passionate, sorry.
That's powerful. No, that's exactly what we should all be thinking about. Anything that you're thinking of transitioning into the virtual space, the first step is to think, what is the purpose of that, whether it's a program or workshop or whatever. So in this example is a career fair, and you're absolutely right, Christine. That's the work that we've done at Johns Hopkins. The purpose is to create powerful connections for students. So these shouldn't be virtual career fairs; they should be virtual connections, activities and events. And I think, I mean, for us, our model is really clear. We're an organization of content, of connections, and of community. We're not, and we are very clear on what we're not. We are not an organization of services. So we had to really just make the cut there. And I know that that's tough on some people, for some people to hear, because of the commitment to some elements of the services. But we really had to just be extra clear about that. We are not that anymore. And this is what we are. So if we are going to build a virtual program that is based on these three, then build that. So one of the questions here is, what have you guys done at Hopkins? Well, our team, this was not my idea. All I said is, don't do a virtual career fair. Do something else, please. And let me just do a shout out to my amazing team at Johns Hopkins. They step up all the way. Not only step up, they are like, I'm having a hard time catching up to them now. And that's when I know that things are going well, is that when I'm no longer pushing or pulling them, that they are just way ahead of me. And on this one, they created a week-long conference-like event with lots of programs that are online. And instead of a career fair, they did a trade floor with 100 employers throughout the week. And it was connections with alumni, it was speakers. We had Chef Jose Andreas, who was the keynote speaker for the program. And we engaged a ton of students in not only connections, but in the consumption of a lot of powerful content that would help them for that program and then beyond. So you can look at it. It was called the Future Fest at Johns Hopkins. So you feel free to go online and look at it. But it's all our team. I had nothing to do with it. Others say, do not do a virtual career fair, and then they didn't do it. And that tells me, I think that's a really good lesson for all of us to say, like, if you really want to do this right, think about what your ultimate vision is, make it about equity, measure the right things. It's about starting from the metrics. What are the metrics that you really care about? And they shouldn't be the numbers of people who show up and satisfaction. They should be about equity. They should be about a number of applications, as you said. They should be about measuring fulfillment and optimism among students and our alumni. And we're measuring using the promoter score everywhere. And I love that you brought up the concept of narrative, because that's one of the things that I think we have an opportunity to use this challenging time to redefine the narrative about who we are. And for our institution and for our students. If our students expect us to be service providers, they're going to treat us as service providers. Faculty are going to treat us as service providers. If that's our narrative, that's all we will be. And we will always be chasing that that sort of that kind of like acceptance from them or that satisfaction from them. But if we turn ourselves into an organization of expertise, of content, of all of these things, then we can be able to start to build a more prominent brand on campus. I think we were really clear in our article, Christine, that narrative rebuilding isn't rebranding. I mean, certainly it can include it. So it can be about just changing your name and changing the vocabulary, and we recommended some of those things, and creating a really powerful flyers, and and having a lot of bells and whistles around your website and your facility. But it's not just about that. It really is about shifting the narrative so that everybody thinks of your organization for a different purpose. They're not thinking of your organization as the organization to send students to get resumes critiqued and mock interviews and get a job or get an internship. But they're really thinking about your organization as an organization that helps students design their lives. So this is why when I came to Johns Hopkins, for example, and I recommend this to all of institutions, I say, throw the word career out of your vocabulary. We really should be about the life design, for example, that we're here impacting their students' lives in general, not just their careers. You see what fits within your institution, but just really step beyond just the brands that have been assigned to us and create a different narrative that adds value to the entire organization, and that aligns with the institutional mission and vision. I know that was really, really important, and I know that's something that you and I have done a lot in our own careers, that we constantly thought about our messaging, what we say, how we say it, how we put stuff out on news articles, our thought leadership about how we brand our organizations on campus, all to create a different type of narrative that drives higher engagement and bring people in rather than just put us as a service provider organization. Thoughts about that?
I think that's absolutely correct. I think it's about, the one word I would say that sort of encapsulates what you just said is positioning. It's about positioning. And I think anytime you need to reposition your center or your work or what you do, it's about thinking of your audience and where you sit, your environment that is around you, and what is going to resonate with those individuals. And to do it with a level of confidence around the fact that you have an expertise in what it is you are doing. I think, I'm really fascinated by actually communication up and across in organizations. I think so much of your value and so much of your productivity and your efficiency and your effectiveness is actually in that. It's not just pushing out programs. It's not just leading your team. It's also effectively managing up, communicating across in your organizations. And I think the redefining the narrative is one of those pieces where it really is about organizational savvy in how you navigate your institution and how you redefine what it is that matters. I'm actually, maybe this is something that we do a follow-up on, but I'm actually going to be engaging with some senior leaders, presidents, provosts, hopefully in the next few coming months, to actually talk about, based on what is a major concern to them in their minds right now for their institution, how does the career piece fit in? And for them, what metrics do matter for them? What do they want to hear about? What is going to resonate with them? Because the reality is most of our senior leaders have never worked in career services. So we have to tell a different story and we have to connect it to what their priorities and their agenda is. And if we get creative, there are lots of ways that we can do that without losing the essence and the importance of our work. It's just about framing and positioning in a different way. And so I think that's going to be, I'm really excited about some of those conversations. I'm excited to hear what they're going to share and to share it back with obviously all of our colleagues so that we can be better equipped to position and to redefine this narrative that you're talking about. So I think it's about positioning.
I agree with you. I can't believe we're at the end of the hour. I want to do another hour with you. I know that for a number of people who are listening to us, they're thinking, okay, like I'm excited, I'm inspired, I agree, I don't disagree, or I disagree. Now what? So what does what does any career services professional, regardless of where they are in the organization, director or assistant director or counselor, if they're motivated by these concepts and they get what we've been telling them, which is it's not about services, it's about content. It's not about virtual. It's about this creating connections. It's about scalability. It's about equity. So if it's not about measuring input, it's about measuring output. It's about creating the narrative. So we're really describing a completely different career center. And now this virtual environment is giving all of us an opportunity to truly build that pretty quickly with technology. Where do they go from here? Like, how do they get started towards that transformation if they haven't yet? And what are some of the courageous moves, the audacious moves that they need to make in order to make some leaps forward?
Yeah, look, I think it all starts from within. I think all change management ultimately starts from within. So that's one piece of responsibility that every single person on this call can take to heart. If there was something that we said that didn't resonate with you, that you're struggling with, that you're thinking about, the most important thing you can do right now is engage in a conversation about that particular topic. Call some colleagues, reach out to some folks, find us, find people who also disagree with you so that you can really hear their perspective and you can hear their thoughts and you can hear their rationale. Because having this conversation and what we're doing right now is really the first step to starting to dismantle some of the systems that we say we want to change. We can't change them if we don't question them. We can't change them if we aren't willing to have difficult conversations that make us feel uncomfortable. So I think that's really the start of it. And then I think from there, all of our different change management, I know Farouk, you and I have done a number of presentations on actual change management and the various steps and stages there, but then it's about figuring out and segmenting your audience and who it is that you have to change this for, right? So you're going to have multiple audiences, your senior administrators, your team. And I think you've got to figure out who are your champions, who are the people on the fence, who are your detractors. And I think even within your detractor segment, you really need to separate out who are the influential ones versus who aren't. And you need to accordingly use your time in the most impactful way so that you're not spending all your time on segments and audiences who are just simply your detractors, but quite frankly, very vocal. And instead focus on some of your champions and the people on the fence that you can really sway in this conversation as you build a guiding coalition of supporters towards whatever new vision is. And my last point that I will make is change is very hard. Change is harder when you don't paint a vision of what is possible. Mm-hmm. So if there's one thing that I would leave everybody, it is to actually think about what is the new thing that you want people to move towards? Because people aren't going to change just because you tell them to change. They are going to change if you can paint a compelling vision of where you want them to go. So I'd leave you with that.
I agree with you. And the one thing that I want to add is what I always said to people who are interested in starting that journey of change. I always say, start with a listening tour. You can never go wrong with that, because I mean, we give you enough concepts here to get you going. But if you really want to do this and do right by your students and by your institution, take about a month or two and do a very deep dive listening tour with all of your stakeholders. Schedule interviews on a daily basis, groups with students, with faculty, with all of your stakeholders. Now with Zoom, it's actually easier to do so because you don't have to travel or to move from building to building. And on one hand, what you will get is a lot more buy-in, but on the other hand, you will get a ton of data and ton of information that will help you create this theory, this vision for the future, completely grounded in data that you collect. If you start from there, I guarantee you will be on the path towards that, towards change. The biggest part of so look, we all resist change. We are human beings, even you and I. As futuristic as we are, we get scared about change. And what I would recommend to you is to really be very aware of your own resistance and where it's coming from, and is it coming from a place of self-preservation? And that's just between you and yourself. Like we all have those moments. I have them too. And if it is about self-preservation, being aware that you, at that moment, you are not about your students, you are about you. That's why you're not wanting to change. One of the questions from one of our respected viewers here was, to my comment earlier, why go outside of the field and train them about career? Why not just train your career professionals, people who have dedicated years into this profession, and train them into content generation? And to be frank with you, the times when I can find somebody like that, I will absolutely go for the career professional who can easily transition into content generation, social media, etc. But truthfully, for the most part, my experience is that what I get from the traditional career professional is resistance, a lot of resistance to a lot of these concepts. And that resistance, I'm okay dealing with it because we can change people's mindsets and help train them, but it slows down progress at a time where we really need to move fast. We really need to move fast. So that's the idea, is that I think if people are willing to get beyond the resistance and to say, I'm being resistant because I am just in it for my own self-preservation. I just want to get to retirement, or I just want to keep doing what I am doing. That's hard to work with. That's why I try to go for other people and then train them on our new concepts. But on the rare occasion where I find the amazing career services professional who is willing to transition into this new brave world of content generation, of building connections online, of scaling up, of letting go of transactional services, I will absolutely go for that. So manage your own resistance, manage your feelings of self-preservation, be brave, be audacious, try new things, build new skills. And what you will find is that you are going to design your life also, not just help your students design their lives. You are going to design your life by just being really courageous and taking risks and creating prototypes for your own careers. I wish you all the very, very best. Christine, this was a fantastic conversation. We went 10 minutes above, and we did not waste a single minute in this conversation. I always enjoy our talks. And I want to thank all of you who showed up today and who engaged in a very lively chat. And I want to remind all of us that the only certain vision for the future is the one that you design. So we could tell you all day long about what the future would look like, but at the end of the day, it's about what you design. Thank you all, and we'll see you at the next Vision Chat. Take care. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.